and that is why I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this bill, and I listened intently to the Minister's third reading speech. The Labour Party is wholeheartedly in favour of Part 1 of the bill. We are less wholeheartedly in favour of Part 2, and I want to elucidate on that shortly. We will support Part 2, but certainly as far as Part 1 is concerned, there is no argument from the Labour Party where this excise is used to reduce tobacco consumption. It is one very valid way and one very effective way of reducing consumption, particularly to discourage new smokers, young people in particular. And Mr. Speaker, I want to use some references from the regulatory impact statement from Treasury when they were considering and advising the government on this measure. They said that there are three broad reasons for taxing tobacco: raising revenue, addressing negative financial externalities from smoking, is what they call it, and discouraging tobacco use for social policy reasons. Part 1 of this bill addresses quite properly the social policy reasons. There are very profound health reasons for increasing the cost of tobacco. In fact, there will have been, I think Treasury says there will have been a very substantial impact between the years ending June 2009 and June 2012 on tobacco volumes. They are forecast to fall in that period by 20%, which is a good thing, following a 38% increase in price. And we in the Labour Party absolutely support this. This is a lethal drug. It is legal and it is lethal. And if there is anything we can do to discourage particularly young people from taking it up, then it is incumbent on this Parliament, in my view, to do so. And so we have no issue at all and support the Minister entirely in her efforts for the social policy reasons. The concerns I have around this, Mr. Speaker, are that it is going to generate additional revenue of some, I think, $528 million over 4 years, $528 million over 4 years with the passing of this legislation. The Treasury says at over $1.3 billion per year, tobacco excise revenues may already exceed the direct health system costs of smoking. That is contested by one of the latest surveys, a recent Ministry of Health study, which Treasury refers to, which estimated the health costs of smoking at up to $1.9 billion a year, or some 15% of vote health. And that estimate used more detailed information than ever before. What I really hope the Minister is able to do and to impress upon her Cabinet colleagues is that this excise should be ploughed back into health, should be ploughed back into addressing quitting smoking, making sure that there is as little access to it as possible, but mostly assisting people even more assiduously than we do now, but paying more money into the assistance for those who wish to quit smoking. But my suspicion, Mr. Speaker, is that this is not the aim of other members of this government, and certainly not of members inside Cabinet. If it were a health measure entirely, Mr. Speaker, it would have come to the Health Select Committee. It didn't. It went to the Finance and Expenditure Committee because it is a revenue-raising measure. I would like to see this revenue-raising measure tagged to the health budget as additional funding to assist people to quit smoking. And then I might take some of the Minister's colleagues more seriously in their intent. The Minister proposing the bill has outlined her absolute commitment to the reduction and eradication eventually of smoking in New Zealand, and I support that entirely, and I do not doubt her motives, but I would like to see more teeth in this that would apply this additional revenue to health outcomes. Mr. Speaker, I need to talk for a moment about Part 2, which is the bit of the bill that divides up into 6 additional bills, because what this does, and we expressed some concern in the committee stages of the bill, and I was one who expressed some of those concerns. We will support this part of the bill, but it raises issues for us, Mr. Speaker, that I think are worthy of consideration. First of all, of course, the CPI measures the rate of price change of goods and services purchased by New Zealand households. And Statistics New Zealand visits 3,000 shops across New Zealand to collect prices for the CPI and to check product sizes and features in order to arrive at some understanding of how much the cost of goods and services to New Zealand households has increased over the previous year. The import of this Part 2 of the bill, with the six additional bills in it, Mr. Speaker, is to take out of the CPI basket of goods that would apply to beneficiaries of all sorts, and we're talking students, we're talking war veterans, we're talking superannuitants, we're talking other beneficiaries, to take out of the basket of goods that those families might spend their money on, tobacco products. So the CPI indexation drops for those people and those people only. This is a way of the government mitigating its costs. In other words, it is cheaper for the government to take tobacco out of the CPI indexation for those appropriations for which it is directly responsible. In other words, benefits. So all of those benefits, war pensions, all of those things that I mentioned earlier, will be adjusted by a CPI which is lower. A CPI which is lower by a fraction, but it all adds up to government expenditure, lowered by a fraction for those people who are dependent upon the government for their income. Now, this raises issues for us, and we think in the Labour Party that it is time perhaps to review how the CPI is arrived at. It might be a useful exercise to see whether or not it remains fair and non-discriminatory to apply a differential CPI indexation to those who are dependent on the government for their income. Of course, there are cost impacts for government in this, but we think that it is time that the process around arriving at the CPI could be reviewed, particularly to see whether there are items that ought to be exempted and there are items that ought to be included in the CPI, and whether or not a differential CPI rate is fair and equitable. If this is about money, then certainly this all works in the government's favour. Not only does it get additional excise, it has to pay out less of a CPI increase to those for whose income the government is responsible. We didn't do this when we were in government. We did not exempt tobacco products from the CPI for beneficiaries. This has been something that this government has done. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is that we fully endorse the health objectives of this bill. We will support the other objectives, entirely. We will support the progress of Part 2 of the bill, but that is not without question marks and not without the need for some future consideration and review. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Todd McClay.
Mr. Speaker, a pleasure to rise and speak on this bill because it is an extremely important piece